Hi guys, welcome to a new video of mine. If you guys are new here, my name is Rachelle. I'm so glad you guys are here today. Today in this video, I'm going to share with you guys all the books I read in January and my thoughts on them. I'm excited for this January wrap up because I think we started off 2024 with a bang. I read 5 books in total. Some of you who are fast readers may not think that's a lot of books, but for me it is because I generally read around 4 books a month. So the fact that I read 5 last month makes me really happy. I'm hoping February is also a good reading month for me. But let's just get into this January wrap up. So the first book I read in January is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I actually started this book in December and I finished it in January, so it was one of those carryover books. If you're wondering what this book is about, let me just go over it with you guys. One day in the December of his junior year at Harvard, Sam exits a subway car and sees Sadie, who is a childhood friend of his, and he sees her on the subway platform. While in the train station, Sam calls Sadie's name and she pretends that she doesn't hear him. But then she turns and a legendary partnership begins. Before even graduating, these two friends have created their first blockbuster video game called Ashigo. Not even 25 years old, Sam and Sadie are successful, rich, and brilliant creators. But of course, these qualities won't protect them from their own creative ambitions or the betrayal of their hearts. I was actually really nervous to start this book because when I read the book description, it sounded like a book about two friends creating a video game together, and I'm not a gamer, so I thought I would get lost and confused when I went deep into the talk about games. However, I can assure you, you do not need to be a gamer to read this book. When this book mentions anything about games, it is explained so well. Actually though, this book was so much more than video games. This book was a story about friendship, what it can be like working with friends professionally, and how personal lives can bleed into these partnerships. This story captured so much of the human experience, and it felt so incredibly raw and real, and I just loved it so much. It was definitely a very captivating read. Sam and Sadie are also such lovable characters. I think Gabrielle Zevin developed them so well because once you start reading about them, you find that you start to care about them a lot. In this book, I also loved how the author sometimes used video games as a medium to tell the human experience. It was definitely very creative and executed well. Something I will say though is that I found that this book started off kind of slow. I wasn't bored or anything, the story had my attention, but the writing was a lot to take in. I don't know if that makes sense, but it just wasn't a book that I could fly through, and that's why it took me so long to read. This was a book that I just had to take my time with in order to understand what I'm reading. Also, Gabrielle Zevin loved to use obscure words in her writing, and sometimes I would have to look up these words in a dictionary. But once I adjusted and got used to her writing style, the book definitely felt easier to read, and of course it became more addictive to the point that I just wanted to keep reading. I was always so excited to pick up this book and continue reading whenever I put it down. That is how good this book was. I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars. I absolutely love this coming of age story. It was definitely a great book to start off the year with. Then I read Once Upon a Broken Heart. This is a YA fantasy and it's the first book in a trilogy. For as long as she can remember, Evangeline has believed in true love and happily ever afters until she learns that the love of her life will marry another. Evangeline becomes desperate to stop this wedding, so she strikes a deal with the Prince of Hearts. In exchange for his help though, he asks for 3 kisses to be given at the time and place of his choosing. But after Evangeline's first promised kiss, she learns that bargaining with the Prince of Hearts, an immortal, is far more dangerous than she ever expected, because the Prince of Hearts has plans, and he wants far more than Evangeline ever expected. This was a series I had to start after reading and loving Stephanie Garber's other trilogy, Caraval, which is actually the prequel series to this series, and just like Caraval, this book did not disappoint me. This was a really good read, and I enjoyed it a lot. I read this book so fast because I love the world Stephanie Garber created, and I got attached to all the characters so quickly that I just wanted to see where their journey would go, especially the character Jax. For those of you who haven't read the Caraval trilogy yet, we meet Jax in that series, and after the events in Finale, which is the last book in that series, I was so curious to where his story would go, so I am of course so glad that we get to see it in this book. In this book, Jax is portrayed as someone we're not supposed to love, but I can't stop myself from loving him because he is definitely the villain who cares, but he pretends that he doesn't. I also loved how this book plays with the idea of happy endings. It's written like a fairy tale, but there is no guarantee that there will be a happily ever after. I ended up giving this book 4 stars because this book was only the start of something bigger. It ended in a place where there was so much room for the story to grow and become more fleshed out. Then on my Kindle, I read Heartless by Elsie Silver. This is the second book in a 5-book series, and it is a romance that falls into the single dad trope. This book follows Cade, who has a full-time job working at the family farm, and he's a father to a 5-year-old little boy named Luke. Given the circumstances, Cade is struggling. His family helps out with looking after Luke, but unfortunately everyone still has their own busy lives, so Cade has no choice but to hire Willa to be Luke's nanny. But of course, when Cade and Willa first meet, they can't seem to keep their eyes off of each other. What's worse is that Cade can't just simply unemploy Willa to avoid this inappropriate attraction, because upon meeting, Willa and Luke have this instant connection, and it immediately makes her the best nanny Luke could ever have. I'm not gonna lie, I honestly didn't think I would enjoy this book as much as I did. And that is only because the single parent trope is not a trope I actually read a lot of. It's actually my least read romance trope, but of course I was so wrong because I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book. The story just kind of clicked for me since the beginning. I think what really did it for me was the dynamic Willa and Luke had. It was so incredibly cute that you just had to love them, and because of this connection, Cade and Willa just made sense from the beginning. Don't get me wrong, there are some reasons to why Cade and Willa wouldn't make the perfect couple. For example, Cade is 13 years older than Willa, and Willa was at the age where she was still figuring out her life, and in the story she actually was. Personally, I don't have a problem with age gaps, but I would find the relationship weird if they are both at different stages of life like this. In this book though, it didn't really feel weird at all to me, which was actually surprising, because of course Willa being the outsider just fit right into the family when she had this immediate connection with Luke. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. There was nothing bad about it, and like I said earlier, I really enjoyed this book and seeing how the story unfolded, but usually my 5-star reads are page turners, and I find myself desperate to keep reading for answers, but unfortunately I just didn't feel that way with this book. The next book I read is The Ballad of Never After. This is the second book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. I picked up this book not long after I finished the first book because the first book ended off in a place where I was just desperate for answers, and I was already invested in the story. This book was definitely better than the first book because the plot thickens, the characters we know and love become even more lovable, the stakes were also so incredibly high, and the ending surprised the hell out of me. As I was reading and coming close to the end, I thought I knew what was going to happen, but then Stephanie Garber just came and said nope, and then the book just ended off in the biggest cliffhanger ever. I was internally screaming when I finished the book. This book gave me such a big book hangover. I also think Jax has just become one of my book boyfriends. In this book, we get to see his character do this thing, and that practically made me fall in love with him. After reading this book though, I can 100% guarantee that this series is a page turner. I again read this book so fast. This story is so addicting and it makes you want to keep reading to the point that you don't even realize how much you've read. I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars, only because I found the first half of the book slower than the last half. I wish the pacing of this book was a little bit more even. It just felt like all the suspense and big reveals were saved for the end. The last book I read in January was A Curse for True Love. This is the third and final book of the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. I, of course, had to pick up this book right after finishing The Ballad of Never After because that book just ended off on the biggest cliffhanger, and I was, of course, again left desperate for answers. And let me just tell you, this book was so good. I ate this book up. And what I'm about to say might actually be an unpopular opinion, but I'm just gonna say it anyways. I actually enjoyed this book more than The Ballad of Never After. I know a lot of people love The Ballad of Never After more, but I prefer this book and I enjoyed it more than I expected. And let me tell you why. This book was the only book in the series where I felt fully invested in the story from cover to cover. For me, it took reading and then finishing the second book to fully fall in love with the world and characters, and that's why when I was reading this book, I felt more invested in the story than I did in the first and second book. In this book, I think Stephanie Garber did a really good job tying up most of the storylines. I say most because there was one storyline where I wish we got to read more about. I wanted to get to know the character Lala a little bit better. It felt like we were told bits and pieces of her, but we didn't get to see those details fleshed out. I get that she's a supporting character and this story isn't about her, but sometimes I found myself wanting more after reading certain things about her. But despite what I just said, this didn't make me like the book any less. I think getting more of Lala's story would have been a nice addition, but in my opinion, it didn't hurt this book or story in any way. Something I really liked in this book was how it was told from multiple POVs. This is actually the only book in the series that does that, and I really liked it because we got to dive deeper into the thoughts and motives of each character. And because of this storytelling method, it fleshed out the characters more and we definitely got a better understanding of them. Although I wish we got more of Jax though, because this book doesn't have a lot of Jax in it. I also really like the whole fairy tale feel in this book and the whole series. It's nice and fluffy, and sometimes I just need a cozy read like that. I gave this book 5 stars. I definitely feel like it deserves it. It was such an enjoyable and wholesome read. This book made me believe in true love. This entire series is a 5-star read for me, and Stephanie Garber just became one of my favorite authors. After reading the Once Upon a Broken Heart series and the Caraval series, I can now tell you guys that you do not need to read Caraval before you start the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. You can still understand the story and world in this series without reading this series. However, if you do intend on reading both of these series, I would highly recommend you to read the Caraval series first, because if you don't, you will spoil a lot of things for yourself in the Caraval series if you choose to read the Once Upon a Broken Heart series first. Yeah, so in my opinion, if you want to read both of these series, definitely read the Caraval series before you start the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. Alright guys, that is the end of my January wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing all the books I read in January and my thoughts on them. If you guys have read any of these books and you want to share with me your thoughts, let me know in the comments down below. I definitely want to hear what you guys think. Before I go though, comment down below what you guys are currently reading. I am gonna start, and I'm currently reading A Little Life, and on my Kindle I am reading Addicted to You. Okay guys, that is all for this video. If you enjoyed it, definitely give this video a thumbs up, and if you guys haven't already done so, definitely subscribe to my channel. I post a lot of book content, so if you're into that, definitely subscribe. It's basically free entertainment. Okay guys, I will see you in my next video. Bye!
Pull the key out the ignition. Run your mouth but I never listen. You hold me back, will never last. Keep talking all your shit. Wondering how all this started. You left me broken hearted. You flip my words, yeah, this love hurts. Keep talking all your shit.